Alaikum. Welcome to the program 7 after 8. And we get into our first interview of the day. It is the big story of the day. And of course, we're looking at the issue around the two ministers implicated in the Eskom investigation. Joining us to unpack that issue, which is on all of our minds here in South Africa and beyond, because the Eskom saga truly has brought us to our knees. I've been saying this for the past so many weeks, so many months. But if we don't fix this, then very definitely the country is broken. Ebrahim Fakir, salamu alaikum. Welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and shukran for having me.
Thank you indeed for your valued time. And obviously, you're going to give us some very some deep insights into this matter. We do know that Andre de Ruyter told Minister Pravin Gordhan about corruption of two ministers implicated in the Eskom probe. Are we surprised by the story having broken last week?
Not at all, I'm afraid, because it's not for me to say, or even you, Julie, to say that we are surprised, because all of the evidence is there in 1,000 and more pages of the Zondo Commission report on state capture and corruption. So we know that the ANC has been at this for quite some time. They needed an entire judicial commission of inquiry into state capture. And even then, it had to be done because the institutions that the ANC was presiding over, such as Parliament, had failed in its duties, in its responsibilities. So, had Parliament been able to conduct the requisite oversight as it should have, we would not even have had the Zondo Commission. But nevertheless, we had it. The evidence has come out. Not much action has been taken on the basis of its findings. In fact, some of the ANC ministers implicated in it and mentioned by name have threatened to take that report on judicial review should anything be done. So that alone should tell you the story of perhaps where we are as a society, its ethical values, particularly of those who are in power, who it appears want all of the authority that comes with it, but none of the responsibility, want all of the power, but wish to take absolutely no accountability. So I'm afraid I'm not terribly surprised. I'm not even surprised. And Minister Gordhan, I'm afraid to say, has neither confirmed or denied that he is the minister that Andre de Ruyter made the revelations to. But whether it is him or isn't him is immaterial, simply because the responsibility, once Mr. de Ruyter fulfills his responsibility to his political principles and he informs them of what happens before, it is their responsibility to take it forward both within their party, the ANC, but more importantly, within the cabinet within which they sit. Why they didn't do so is quite beyond me. People then also make the accusation that Mr. de Ruyter must provide the evidence and must lay charges at the police. Well, guess what? He didn't exactly so. The reality is that there were interventions, both from politicians and from the higher echelons of the police and the security services, where many of those who were implicated and who may have been charged were either released without any further proceedings or given despicable amounts of minuscule bail in order to simply get out. And since then, nothing much has been done beyond that. So I'm afraid not very surprising.
Okay, so it seems to me, sadly, that de Ruyter is the fall guy, unfortunately. And it doesn't matter who fills his shoes, he's going to be sitting with the same problems. I don't think any CEO appointed in that position is going to be able to fix Eskom. Simply because it's rotten to the core, and the ministers that have been implicated are being are being protected by the ANC. And here's where cadre deployment comes in. And here's where the ANC closes ranks and supports their cadres despite them being rotten and corrupt to the core. But I'd like to ask you what you make of this statement by Pravin Gordhan. He says that he was blindsided by the former Eskom boss, that is obviously Andre de Ruyter. He also goes on to say that he criticized de Ruyter for publicly speaking out about the widespread graft. And he says that it's very disappointing. And this is the kicker. Many people in government gave him support, obviously de Ruyter, suggesting that government gave de Ruyter the support that he needed for his role. And as a patriotic South African, we thought that he was going to make a proper contribution to ensure energy security in the country. That's absolutely laughable, isn't it? How can he have done that with his hands being tied and knowing that the topmost of government officials or politicians are involved in lining their pockets? And let me just end that statement. I quote, I'm sure that there are some good things that he has done, so we can't take that away from him. At the same time, to engage in the incorrect narrative coming out of that interview, obviously it's referring to the ENCA interview, is just completely shocking. And this is what Gordhan had to say. Your thoughts?
Julie, what's shocking is what Minister Gordhan actually had to say. That's what's shocking. Because, irrespective of the merits and demerits of Mr. de Ruyter's own capacity and execution as an executive at Eskom, he may have woefully failed on a number of measures, including the kind of reduction in load shedding which may have been amended, and that's entirely possible. But he did, of course, engage in a serious policy shift away, not immediately from coal, but towards renewable energy. And that wasn't his policy decision. He didn't make this up. He was carrying out a mandate that was given to him by the government, which has made policy signals of wanting to slowly license a greater number of both independent power producers, but also procure a great amount of funds from some of the international partners for what is called a just energy transition towards more clean energy. So that is a mandate which de Ruyter was carrying out on behalf of the government. Yet, they make it sound as if that was an escapade and a frolic of his own. He didn't decide this. This was a policy decision. He implemented it and got the necessary funds and funding through travels and through his engagement with the international partners and donors and so on. So, despite his other weaknesses, he carried out his mandate. The second, what is quite shocking about Minister Gordhan's statements are that this guy is said not to have carried out his fiduciary duties, but he reported to his political principals, who either laughed off the matter or simply ignored it, or worse, as you say, protected those ministers who are in there by actually saying things like, well, we have to allow a certain amount of bad things to happen if you want a greater goal to be achieved. So that's the kind of cynical moral trade-offs and moral relativity that they engaged in order to justify a certain kind of political posture. And that's the surprising thing. The third surprising thing is this accusation that Mr. de Ruyter was constructing an inverted commas narrative. And the narrative, as many other leaders of the ANC says, is that Mr. de Ruyter was engaging in political discussion. Well, guess what? It wasn't really political discussion. What he was saying and what he was doing factually was taking examples of political interference and political meddling, and on the other extreme, complete political amnesia. That means someone who is not intervening where they should be when they have the responsibility to do so. And using those examples to illustrate how that political either failure or meddling at the other extreme has affected the governance process, the process of combating corruption, the process of actually fixing that sabotage, the involvement of criminal networks, the embedded bad behavior within the Eskom staff. So that is what he did. He used these issues to illustrate the governance failures. Yet, the ANC likes to make this, and Minister Godhan has been complicit in this, is to change the narrative and make it political and ideological. You know why? Because they genuinely believe that they can very easily win a political and ideological argument, which the ANC has actually been excellent at winning. However, much weaker, much more useless, in fact, when it comes to the governance, to the executive, and to the management debates. That's where they woefully fail, which is why they like to turn this into a political issue when it is patently not. And that, unfortunately, is what's been so surprising of Minister Godhan's complicity in this.
Ebrahim, can I please ask you to indulge us for another minute or two? We need to take an ad break, and when we come back, I have 2-3 very important questions to put to you as well. So please, will you stay with us?
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
There's no smell that takes me back to the comfort of my childhood than the smell of black seed oil being applied by my nanny. Now I'm using Tib black seed in my own home to soothe sniffles and coughs, to help with digestion and immunity, and of course, as part of my beauty routine. After all these years, I've come to appreciate the wisdom in finding comfort and shifa in trusted treatments like Tib black seed. You can find Tib black seed at all leading pharmacies or find out more at blackseed.co.za.
Deadly earthquakes struck Turkey and Syria, leaving communities devastated and in dire need of assistance. Over 8,000 buildings and homes were reduced to rubble. Over 9,000 people have been confirmed dead, with hundreds of thousands seriously injured. Families and communities are in disarray as search and rescue operations continue day and night. Islamic relief teams are on the ground providing vital emergency relief to the affected communities. Your support enables us to provide food, medical care, and emergency shelter. Donate now and help us save lives. Visit www.islamic-relief.org.za.
Ah, the kitchen, the heart of the home, where memories are made and celebrated. Our go-to place for those freshly stacked pancakes early in the morning or for that late-night snack munchies. We are in there together, cooking, eating, and celebrating life together. Let's keep the kitchen a place that is shared by everyone, where we build stronger bonds and grow together. Sunfoil, now we cooking. Visit nowwecooking.co.za for recipes that everyone can help make.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities. Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities, your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. It is 21 after 8 o'clock. I'm talking with political analyst Ebrahim Fakir, and of course we're talking about the issue regarding the 2 ministers implicated in the Eskom investigation. So Ebrahim, back to you. Let's look at what Energy and Mineral Resources Minister Gwede Mantashe has said about this whole situation. He has previously taken a dig at Director, comparing him to a policeman who was focused on chasing criminals without a grasp of Eskom's challenges. And he goes on to say, and I quote, when you are a lawyer, the actual challenges you are not going to understand, you are going to chase criminals. That is your competence. And this was a statement he made last year in December, taking a swipe at Director. How do you view that, those thoughts from Gwede Mantashe? These are supposed to be the leaders of our country to move us forward. And these are the type of swipes they take at other leaders of corporates, etc.
Well, Julie, the minister I was talking about who said that if there's any action against them, they will take the Zondo Commission of State Capture report on review. A minister of a government and a high-ranking member of a party who asked for the Zondo Commission. That same person wants to take it on review. Well, this is the minister who is on record as having said that. So it's unsurprising that Minister Mantashe has found a scapegoat. And the unfortunate reality is that there's a major contradiction and absurdity in what he has said. So if you put in an executive in place and the executive tells you that quite apart from the engineering and science and physics problems that we have around electricity generation, transmission and distribution, and the fact that there are major policy problems which we inherited historically which can't be fixed in the near future, but here's the plan to do so. That's one set of problems. The second set of problems is that there are embedded criminal networks, cartels, saboteurs, people who are working against the system, who are being openly destructive. Well, that's the second set of problems. So those are the two sets of broad problems that the executive point out, quite apart from the other governance and other problems. And the executive says, here's the plan policy-wise to fix the one set of policy and regulatory problems. But here's the solutions to the problems of fixing and doing away with the saboteurs, the cartels, and so on. Well, doesn't it stand to logical reason that if that's the problem, then that's how the problem has to be attacked? So if you put in place a person to run an entity and they tell you that this is the problem, and then they develop mechanisms to deal with that problem, and you criticize them for it, somehow it doesn't make sense. And it actually flies against the face of basic logic. The person tells you criminality is a problem, but then you tell them, no, you mustn't deal with the criminality. You must deal with the inevitable things that you cannot physically fix, such as the inherited policy problems of underinvestment, under-budgeting, lack of maintenance, and so on. And by the way, that's also a byproduct of the criminal networks who saboteured many of the operations at Eskom. So there's a close link between them. And then when the person develops processes to deal with this, you're telling them that they're doing the wrong thing. Well, it's a case of damned if they do and damned if they don't.
Ebrahim, my final question, and it's a very important one, but I can't go into too much detail. I'm just going to read the headlines to you. I'm sure you've come across it, and I nearly fell off my chair when I read this. But let's see what you make of it. In a story that was, I'm just trying to see, I think Ray White, no, it wasn't Ray White. Anyway, there's a press statement suggesting that Ramaphosa has said government is not constitutionally obligated to provide South Africa with power. I haven't read the full story. There might be a very valid counter argument to this, or there might be some supporting evidence for why he's saying this. But what do you make of that headline? It's very worrying, is it not?
Yes, it's a real shirking of responsibility. And I think on the technical, on the very narrow and the very crude reading of what the Constitution says, the President is correct on a narrow, on a very technical and crude reading of it, because
Yo.
this also has a very as a context, and the context, Julie, is that there's a court case being prosecuted,
Yes.
and the president's responding to those court papers, right? So on a very narrow reading, it's saying, well, the president himself is not responsible. The president is responsible for a set of entities who to do so. So do you see where the crudity starts to emerge?
Right.
But it also
But you're referring, Ebrahim, you're referring to the court case that was brought by the UDM and 18 others in saying that government was not in breach of the Constitution. Is that what you're referring to?
That's the case I'm referring to. So they are referring in that way and turning the argument on its head on the basis of the narrow reading of the responsibilities of the head of state. Now, where this matters is on the axiom I suggested to you about people wanting power but without the responsibility, and wanting authority without the accountability. And this is the way of shirking that responsibility by wanting everything, but when you are responsible for wanting it, then washing your hands of it and saying, it's not my problem. I'm only supposed to oversee Eskom. So I've created a utility. We are working with that utility. But the utility has problems. Therefore, it's an operational issue, not a constitutional issue. So that's the way they're going to spin this argument out of the narrow legal confines of the argument. But morally and ethically, Eskom doesn't exist in a vacuum. Sure. Eskom is not being presided over by some alien government or some government in outer space. It is this government which has the right authority, sure, because they got the consent of the majority of South Africans who voted it into power, but that it has not well managed the responsibilities that have been entrusted to it is the fundamental question that they refuse to squarely take on its head and blame everything else. In the past, the fact that there was underinvestment under the first ANC administration, and though that was the case, you can't take responsibility. So I'm afraid what we have is a very cynical reasoning. We are of the ANC, but we can't take responsibility for the past mistakes of the ANC. We are in the ANC, and the ANC will fix everything, but we can't take responsibility for things the ANC broke in the past. So there's this duplicitous and really cynical approach to responsibility, and unfortunately, truth and basic values. So now not only do we have the compounded problems we inherited from history, we have a complete erosion of basic values that you teach children about honesty, about truth, and about facts which are before you. And we teach children not to lie, not to be dishonest, not to be untruthful. But this is what our politicians do.
Absolutely. Ebrahim, that's where we have to leave it, unfortunately. Really loved your insights on the story. Undoubtedly, we will talk in depth in the future, inshallah. The story gets dirtier, uglier, and murkier, the saga of the Lords of Darkness, and that, of course, is Eskom. The time is exactly 8:30 a.m. Standing by to talk with us is our next guest, and that is you, Zunaid Akwaya. We'll join you in a minute or two, inshallah.